There are a variety of reasons why people might self-disclose differently, and culture is one of those variances. And lots of times self-disclosure is dependent on the level of formality of that particular culture. In the United States, we have a relatively informal culture in terms of titles that we refer to people, even within the family. It's very loose. Lots of times we've even dropped saying sir and ma'am. I can recall even a professor once, I was using ma'am and discussing things back and forth with him, and then he finally just told me, I think that's rude. I feel like you're telling me that I'm old and that you don't really trust me and that we're not peers. And I'm going, well, you're my professor. But they're saying to me back, well, that doesn't matter. I still think that we're on an equal footing in terms of our relationship. This was in graduate school. That just floored me because I had a different level of formality than the other person did, just in terms of the titles that I was using to talk to them. So formality differs with your culture, your upbringing, your background, your experiences in life. And sometimes that can be from within the United States, maybe a region that you were born in geographically, or it could even be your family itself and different rules and norms within your family. But in large part, a lot of European countries have more formal cultures, and in those more formal cultures they actually would disclose less information more quickly in a relationship. So while an American might be more likely to give personal information, someone necessarily from like England or Germany or even France may choose to withhold that kind of information and be a little bit more discreet in terms of what they disclosed. Now, you can see that there could be some misinterpretations then and how the relationship is progressing cross-culturally. So you have to really consider the formality of the culture in cross-cultural relationships and how that would impact the ways in which we disclose information, because a lot of misperceptions can surface. And if you haven't thought about taking a class in intercultural communications, I would really encourage you to, because cross-cultural relationships are emerging within our friend circles and our friend networks, and especially within our workplaces. And learning how to deal with those relationships in meaningful ways and learn about those cultures so that you can relate to them and better interpret messages more accurately is very important. Also, though, there can be differences in the way genders disclose information. When we talk about gender differences, we're talking about femininity and masculinity, which in communication we look at as social constructions. And there can be different social constructions of what individuals consider to be feminine and masculine. But there's been some research that has been conducted on what we would say like feminine ways of knowing, which are normally very relationally linked, in which a lot of feminine identities are linked with their social networks. That is, the people that they know and the relationships that they have. And what's interesting is research has looked at what we label as report talk and rapport talk. Report talk is more along the lines of giving information and negotiating and providing knowledge within the relationship, and rapport talk is more about sharing experiences in a way that builds up the relationship. And you may not be surprised, but research has indicated that men have a greater tendency to engage in report talk and females have a greater tendency to engage in rapport talk. And so in cross-gendered relationships, there can be a lot of differences in the way that we self-disclose. And that's good to know in your cross-gendered relationships, whether they be romantic or friendships or coworkers or family relationships, that men lots of times have a greater tendency for report talk and women have a greater tendency for rapport talk. And so when you're asking from a female perspective, a male friend, open up, tell me more about what's going on in this area of your life, and they seem uncomfortable, well, it may be because of what, in terms of gender roles, they have been expected to do in the past. In addition, we look in terms of self-disclosure at some guidelines that we can use as norms, not laws, but norms to guide our behavior. Self-disclosure, what we want is we want the kind of information to be disclosed on our part that we want others to disclose back to us. So this is sort of the golden rule of self-disclosure, so to speak. You treat the other person like you want to be treated by disclosing the kind of information that you want them to disclose back to you. And this helps with at least your level of comfort and avoiding embarrassment from your standpoint. However, you have to consider what the other person would deem to be appropriate or inappropriate. Also, you self-disclose more intimate information when you believe that there's an acceptable risk. That is, you don't feel too vulnerable in the relationship at that point in time. You have built up a level of trust with the other person. You feel like if you tell something to them in confidence, that they would keep that confidence. You feel like they wouldn't judge you harshly if you disclose that information. So you wouldn't feel the need, because that risk would not be too great, to manage your privacy. Also, you continue intimate self-disclosure usually only when it's reciprocated. So if the other person doesn't seem to be reciprocating the kind of disclosures you're making, then you probably know that they feel uncomfortable at that point in time. Not always. I mean, not always. Some people are really good listeners, and maybe they feel the need to have you open up, and they'll take their turn later on. Maybe their norms for turn taking are a little bit different than most other people's. However, most of the time, if someone's not reciprocating, then you would discontinue that level of disclosure. Also, you move self-disclosure to deeper levels gradually. So this happens over time. So you don't meet someone and in 5 seconds start telling them your deepest, darkest secrets and your greatest fears in life and your greatest weaknesses and vulnerabilities after you've only known them for a few minutes, right? You have to develop this gradually and over time. Now, that doesn't mean that your timetable is the same as another person's, as I mentioned before. However, you do know that this happens over time. Topic avoidance is really interesting in terms of how this develops gradually in a relationship, because there are certain topics that we do avoid at the beginning of relationships. Topics that we know are kind of taboo, that are difficult to discuss, that maybe within our culture aren't acceptable to talk to people that are just acquaintances about those topics. And in romantic relationships, topic avoidance is very interesting because we tend to avoid, toward the beginning of a relationship, actually defining the relationship and the level of intimacy that you have with them, and really sort of negotiating at that point whether or not it's an exclusive romantic relationship or an open romantic relationship. Usually you avoid that at the beginning because people have a fear that if they disclose information too quickly about their ideas of commitment and what the relationship is, that they would actually harm future progression of the relationship. And that's not always the case, but that's what studies have found, that a lot of people, that's how they avoid topics at the beginning of romantic relationships. And then finally, we reserve the most personal and sensitive self-disclosures for ongoing intimate relationships. So you don't just pour your heart out to an acquaintance. You're going to pour your heart out to someone who's an intimate, close relationship, like a best friend or a parent, or a really close sibling, or a romantic partner that has been your romantic partner for a given period of time. So you reserve personal and sensitive self-disclosures for ongoing relationships.